who was a sympathizer of the Cuban Revolution, and they put a big photograph of Oswald in the newspapers. You may remember it. It had this hapless man standing there holding up a socialist newspaper in one hand, had a rifle in his other hand, he had a pistol on his hip, and he was supposed to be the assassin. But you looked at that photograph closely, and you saw the sun behind Oswald, and then you saw a shadow formed by his nose going across the front of his face. So you thought either there were two suns in the sky that day, or this is a doctored photograph and a concocted story. And that's what Ellen Ray realized. Jim Garrison, who she came to know, had been the district attorney in New Orleans, and he was the only one to bring a prosecution against anyone involved in the Kennedy assassination. By definition, when he went after one of the people involved, it was a conspiracy. The guy's name was Clay Shaw. He was a New Orleans businessman, and he was a CIA operative. And Garrison tried him. The trial was undermined by the government. He failed to get a conviction, but he wrote a book about it. That book was edited by Zach Sklar, and it was published by Sheridan Square Press. The president of Sheridan Square Press was Ellen Ray. But she didn't stop there. She cornered Oliver Stone in an elevator. He was a famous director even then, and she asked him if he would please look at the book and think about doing a movie out of the book, which he did. Zach Sklar wrote the screenplay. The movie won an Academy Award. So we had an Oscar, imagine, an Oscar-winning movie about a conspiracy to murder the President of the United States with the involvement of the CIA. That created massive doubt about the ability of this government to tell the truth. And it later opened the way for the final conclusion which I believe, and Ellen believed, and many of us do, that in fact it was the CIA that murdered Kennedy, and they did it because Kennedy wanted to roll back the Cold War, recognize Cuba, have decent relationships with Russia, turn back the nuclear arms race, and get out of Vietnam. That was a turning point in history, and Ellen Ray understood that. With respect to Vietnam, Ellen and Bill joined the National Lawyers Guild Military Law Project and went over to the South Pacific in Okinawa, where they defended anti-war GIs. Now this was quite a breakthrough, because the anti-war movement at that time, which was in its main made up of students, thought, GIs, they're killers. We have nothing to say to them. Ellen didn't think so. She thought no one has more at stake than the GIs in Vietnam, and we should go to their defense, which she did. When she came back, she became the co-chair, along with Len Weinglass, of the Guild's International Committee. With respect to torture, Ellen and her friend Michael Ratner wrote the first book on Guantanamo, and Ellen was no stranger to the issue of torture. She had befriended Henri Alleg. Alleg was a newspaper editor in Algiers. He was a Frenchman who moved to Algiers. He supported the Algerian Revolution. He was picked up by the French and tortured. He was waterboarded. He refused to answer any of their questions. He later wrote a book called The Question. After he came back from each waterboarding session, he would write down on toilet tissue what they did to him and what it did to him and what thoughts he had about it. He smuggled that tissue out of the prison. It was published in France. The introduction to the book was written by Jean-Paul Sartre. The French immediately banned the book, and it became a bestseller. Ellen was responsible for getting that book republished in the United States by the University of Nebraska Press, and she wrote the introduction. Ellen was a supporter of the Maurice Bishop government in Grenada. Bishop was a black socialist. He was, if you think about it, the American government's nightmare. It was like Malcolm X coming to power. They did whatever they could to destabilize his government. Lew Wolf wrote this about Ellen's work there. Lew wrote, "To work alongside Ellen Ray and Bill Schaap for 27 years, producing Covert Action Information Bulletin, later renamed Covert Action Quarterly, was to know the true meaning of investigative journalism at its best. One example among many, I recall, was when she actually danced with a U.S. diplomat and wheedled some key information from him some weeks before Ronald Reagan ordered the U.S. invasion, the capture of Maurice Bishop and his entire cabinet, stripped them all naked in front of a wall, and assassinated them with machine guns. Her spirit lives on." The day she died, John Pilger, a great journalist, wrote the following: "Ellen Ray was the embodiment of Americans at their best. Her journalism shamed and shames the counterfeit variety served up in the mainstream. Covert Action was unique. Her fearless work, such as her support of Jim Garrison, had the instincts and morality of a true truth teller. I salute her." And I just want to finish with this observation. My wife Debbie and I were up at Ellen and Bill's apartment in the Village the day she received the diagnosis of barely treatable terminal lymphoma. She maintained her characteristic courage. She was not sentimental or maudlin or superstitious. She knew death was final. She said to us, "What will be, will be." Ellen will be remembered for her kindness and her high spirits, for her courage and her political sagacity. The Sandinistas have given us a way to not quite say goodbye to a departed comrade. They say, and we say, Ellen Ray, presente. Thank you.
In the morning, your kisses deep and warm, the hair upon the pillow like a sleepy golden hallelujah. Thanks.
Of course, we have this fantastic band to thank for this beautiful music today. We also have this guy over here who I'd like to introduce, Bill's cousin, and my cousin also, Phil Schaap.
I'm here really to give some family perspective, but I always remember Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and they were a small group, so when they went to gigs, they used to travel in car caravans. And sometimes it was a long drive to the next gig, so they pulled over on the side of the highway to relieve themselves, and in the distance, just like here, there was a funeral going on. And they sort of mosey over and stood in the back, and the minister said, "Is there anyone who would like to say anything about the deceased?" And nobody said a thing. So Art Blakey walked into the center of the funeral and said, "Well, if no one wants to talk about the deceased, I'd like to say a few things about jazz." How about our band? That's Eric Reed on piano. Ken Salvo has been doubling banjo and guitar. Ken Salvo. Dave Chamberlain on trombone. You might not see him behind that pole, but he's swinging everybody. Ollie Jackson on the percussion. One of my longtime jazz buddies, Randy Sankey on trumpet. And at the very least, a triple threat tonight, or this evening, this afternoon. Vince Giordano, bass, tuba, and vocal. And they've all come together to speak to the Schaap family, but of course our clarinetist is very close to Bill and knew Ellen and shared so many special times with him in New Orleans, Evan Christopher. And I just want to, in complimenting these musicians and joining you in the applause, I want to explain some of the repertorial choices to come, because we're going to have a vocalist at the end, Brianna Thomas, and Vince is going to sing Back in Your Own Backyard. So why are these tunes so special? It's because they represent Ellen Ray. She was not only proud of Willa Cather, who she was related to. She, despite whatever political differences she might have had with the state of Nebraska, she was a Nebraskan, and she was happy about that, felt strong pride about it, and noticed that in the jazz age, there was a pop singer from Nebraska who really made it big named Ruth Etting. And so Bill asked me to make sure that Ruth Etting is represented musically. And of course, she was part of the jazz age, and thank heaven she used jazz musicians, because I can't really call her another Billie Holiday. But she did some great songs, and Back in Your Own Backyard was one of her blockbuster hits, and Vince is going to do it. And so there's some repertorial analysis. It's not now yet, though. Not yet. No, you know me for 50 years. I don't talk for short stretches. I'm sure that you realize that by any family standard, Ellen and Bill are unusually leftward thinking in their politics. They're plumb radicals. And it kind of was huge in their lives and known by our family. But, you know, Bill has such a calm, charming, sophisticated, hip, lucid, well-spoken way of putting over things that even the most right-wing family members tolerated him. Ellen was overt. When she joined in, sparks flew. It was some of the greatest entertainment I've ever witnessed. And I'm sorry to report that a number of our family members could not enjoy it while it was in progress. So here, long after the fact, a couple of my favorite anecdotes about it. Now, I don't mean to misspeak since there are a number of family members here, but I would say that our most right-wing family member was our Uncle Dutch. And Uncle Dutch was pro-Israel. He was so pro-Israel, his given name was Israel. And one of the first times that Bill brought Ellen to the Uncle Dutch household in Brooklyn, he was waxing poetic about Menachem Begin. He thought this was a righteous man and one of the greatest human beings of all time. And we were letting him have his way, because if he interrupted Uncle Dutch, it meant that he was going to talk for an extra 2 hours. Ellen didn't know that, so she said, "Don't you know that Menachem Begin is a KGB agent?" Well, there was 2 hours of conversation, but it wasn't all Uncle Dutch. And our Uncle Dutch and Bill's father was Maurice Schaap. My father was Walter Schaap. The third sibling was Eleanor Schaap. She married Uncle Dutch. And she had grown up with Bill's mother, Leah. So the families were close, and their 50th wedding anniversaries, indeed their weddings back in 1931, were days apart. So we had a couple of big blockbuster family events. And at Bill's parents' 50th wedding anniversary, Uncle Dutch was talking again, and he was explaining that he was now 50 years of marriage. They were going to take a big vacation, and once again, they were going to go to Israel. And Ellen busted in and said, "Why go to Israel again for your vacation? Why not go to Cuba?" So it really wasn't party conversation, but it was funny, and it was huge, and it's a piece of her getting a piece of somebody else. But it wasn't all like that, and you know, even though Bill seems to be the calm spokesperson for their political ventures, I do recall having some hearts-to-hearts with Ellen. She kind of grasped that, you know, somewhere back in the 60s, I became aware of the controversy over the Kennedy assassination, that I probably either in high school or early college read Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane. And she realized, you know, that I had a limited background in this incredible coup d'etat. She sat me down, part admonishment, part cheerleading, but part thorough investigation and presentation. She said, you know, it wasn't a mafia hit. It was a coup d'etat. And she really changed my perspective on it. And there was another long talk. It was equally heartwarming. I kind of didn't really grasp this one as well, but she wanted me to know one day just what a nice guy Brezhnev was. She felt fondly about him, and she wanted me to know that. And, you know, I really didn't know him or Andropov or any of them, but, you know, okay, he was a nice guy. I got the message. And the message is that Ellen Ray was a member of our family. And I remember the day I met her. I'm a little bit younger, I'm the youngest of our generation. But I now could drive, and our mutual grandmother, whom Rosie is named for, Rose Morris Schaap, she had died, and there was to be a ceremony at the gravesite. It probably was a year after her death. And somehow I got the assignment of picking up Ellen and Bill and driving them to the cemetery. I have some distant recollection that you guys were living on the Upper West Side, not West 4th Street, and I picked you up there. And it was really important to Ellen Ray that she was part of this ceremony for this woman who, of course, was a preceding member of the Schaap family, but a revered matriarch. And we talked about it and talked about Rosie's ancestor, my grandmother, Bill's grandmother, Rose Schaap, Rose Morris Schaap. And Ellen really felt close to the family, but we felt very close to her. She did us a lot of solids.
We leave home expecting to find a bluebird, hoping every cloud will be silver lined. But we all return, as we all learn, that we left our happiness behind. The birds with feathers of blue will be waiting for you back in your old backyard. You'll see your castles in Spain through your window pane, back in your own backyard. Oh, you can go to the east, go to the west. Someday you'll come weary at heart, back where it started from. You'll find your happiness lies right under your eyes, back in your own backyard. Swing it, guys. Now you can go to the east, go to the west. Someday you'll find where at heart started from. You'll find that happiness lies right under your eyes, back in your own backyard.
So all of you have heard at least once today that Bill and Ellen were married for 44 years. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's one person in the room who knew Ellen even longer than Bill, and that's our next speaker, Bob Levis.
Hold on to your friends with both hands. That's the kind of friend that Ellen was. She was loyal. She had my back many times in the 60s. And she loved justice. That was the word she loved most of all. And she always, always fought for the underdog. When I first met Ellen, she was already an accomplished investigative journalist. She had penetrated the inner circles of Max Jacobson. Whoops, I just dropped a name. I'll be dropping a lot of names in the next 10 minutes. Max Jacobson was also known as Dr. Feelgood. And a lot of people around here in New York went to him because he was dispensing some of Grandpa's cough medicine, including JFK and Jacqueline, the Camelot couple. Ellen heard about this and went over there and got through the records. She wrote the story, she got the scoop, but the New York Times would not publish it. Now, the New York Times is going to be a strain of untruths here in this little narrative. Ellen printed it in the National Enquirer, which was a scandal sheet then, but they did some good stories. Ellen and I both came from the Midwest. She came from Nebraska, I came from Wisconsin. We instinctively felt that there was something more than bomb shelters and football. So we went to the East Coast. Ellen went to Cambridge first, the intellectual capital. In the early 60s, I came right to New York. I wanted to make a corporate self. I really did. I worked for NBC News Film. I worked for Westinghouse Productions, and I worked for Time Life Sports Illustrated. I really wanted to be a corporate guy, but it didn't seem right. And then I read in the New York Times there was something going out in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury. I dropped everything here in New York and I went straight out west. And there really was something new happening out there, something that never happened in American history as far as I'm aware. The 1% was not threatened by the 99% for a brief time in history, just a small window. And I was lucky enough to capture some of that tribalism. And I made a film called Gold. And I apologize to some of you who live up in the Catskills, because I understand that Ellen used to lock the doors and make people watch this film. Sorry, Bill. And anyway, Ellen heard about the film and came out to San Francisco. First, she vetted me to make sure that I wasn't a CIA operative. And then she said, Levis, come to New York. I'm going to raise some money for you. I'm going to produce this film. And she brought me to New York. And she had a film opening. I mean, not just a party for raising money. At Susan Woods, the photographer in the West Village, had a duplex. And Bradley, the jazz club, it was a popular jazz club back then, he catered the party. And I brought in the West Coast influence. I brought bowls of marijuana and set them out. New York hadn't seen this before. And I also knew liquid light shows. I projected film on the walls, and lots of people showed up. And it was the cognoscenti of New York. It was a wonderful happening. And what happened then is Ellen said, that's not enough. Even though people showed up, Jonathan Schell showed up, and he was a young man at that time, and Billy Burroughs showed up in a little stingy brim. We were right on the cusp of the beatniks. And Ellen said, that's still not enough. I want you to meet this friend of mine over in London. He owns a boat. I said, well, great. You know, maybe he's sailing on the Thames. A boat, my ass. This was a freighter. This was Ronan O'Reilly, who was the pirate radio operator, and he operated in the middle of the North Sea with the British government going against him all his career. He was a charming Irishman, and he and Ellen put some sounds onto the soundtrack, which I was happy with. But Ellen and I, we liked it. We clicked. So we said, let's make another film. And the moratorium was coming up in Washington, D.C. And Ellen sat like this for about 6 hours. And I know Bill knows that pose. And I wondered, she was like in a trance. And then she said, Levis. She broke out of it. And I said, what? And she says, you're from Wisconsin. And I said, yeah. And she says, my last name is Ray. And I said, yeah. And he says, do you know? She said, do you know who Nicholas Ray is? And I said, yeah, the Hollywood director. And folks, this is the way a great organizer's mind works. She says, Nicholas Ray is from Wisconsin too. We should be working together. And she took off for Germany. She didn't have to ask anybody. She just flew over to Germany. And on the Isle of Sylt was Nicholas Ray. How she found him, I have no idea. And what she told him, I don't know. But we had gathered a group of filmmakers, Claudia Weil and Grady Watts, and we had a safe house in Washington, D.C., right off of DuPont Circle. And on the eve of the moratorium in 1969, Ellen flew into America with Nicholas Ray coming out of retirement. And the city was caked in tear gas. This was a militarized police force by this time. And we gathered, we filmed all weekend, and on Sunday, Jim Hormel, another connection of Ellen's. You may know his name. He was the ambassador to Luxembourg, the first admittedly gay ambassador. He and Dick Gregory wanted to set up a third party. Third parties in this country just have gone nowhere. But Jim decided to finance our film company. Ellen had a plan. She took Nick Ray to Chicago, and I tagged along, and we filmed the Conspiracy 7. Bobby Seale was in jail by this time, and we gathered one evening. Nick was a great organizing tool. People just came to him. And we circled around a table, and we talked about the future of the movement with Bill Kunstler and Lenny Weinglass and all the conspirators at that time. And future of the movement, we Tom Hayden also taught a class that night on karate for defense of women, and Abby Hoffman. Abby was a very funny man, and he got up on a ladder and he pretended he was Judge Julius Hoffman. He shared the same last name. And we filmed all evening long, and we had one stipulation: to get out of the studio by 7 a.m. So we got back after an hour of sleep, started cleaning up. Bill Deloge, our other partner, Nick Ray, and myself, and then the telephone was ringing. I picked up the phone, and it was the attorney for the Black Panthers. Fred Hampton had just been shot and killed. Did we have a camera? Yes, we did. An Aeroflex, a 400-foot roll, and a Bolex, a 100-foot roll. We jumped in the cab and went out to the apartment. The place was a mess. Fred Hampton's body had been taken. Mark Clark had also been killed, and there was blood everywhere. We didn't know what to do, so we just filmed everything in the whole apartment. There was a bloody mattress, and there was sticky blood on the floor. It was a cold Chicago morning, and an hour later we were finished. I went back to where I was staying. Ellen had made arrangements for me to stay at John and Rona Kiffner's apartment. John Kiffner was the Midwest correspondent for the New York Times. He was out in Indiana that day, and Rona was watching a TV program. And I sat down and I looked at the program, and it was State's Attorney Hanrahan. He was lecturing that earlier that morning there'd been a shootout. Once again, this term, a lone assassin, a shootout, these are terms that are used over and over again, and they are lies. He was pointing to what he said were bullets shot at the police. And sitting in my briefcase right next to me, I knew that he was lying. And I froze, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew because I'd watched the testimony of the police earlier on the trial, and they said they'd spent $3 million. They admitted under oath that they'd spent $3 million on undercover work. I knew I couldn't get the film developed in Chicago, and I expected to be busted any minute. So I jumped in a cab, and I got in a bus, and another cab, and I ended up at the Palmer House Hotel, put the film there, and went back to John and Rona's apartment after making a reservation to get out to New York. And there was John Kiffner. He'd just come back from Indiana. And I said, "John, did you hear the news?" And he says, "Yes, I did, and I've already filed my story." And I said, "You what? Where'd you get your information?" He said, "I called up the police." And I said, "Oh, shit. Great source." And I just left. I was disgusted. And I came back, and Ellen and I came back to New York, and we agreed that the film should be given to Mike Gray and Howard Alk because they were filming the life of Fred Hampton, and they were just about done with it when he was assassinated. And I thought that could be the end. I got out. I mean, I bailed. This was real. This wasn't some hippie, yippy-dippy, running a pig for president. This was war. The war had been declared. And Ellen didn't let me stay long. She called up and she said, "Levis, we have to make another film. Come on back to New York." So I followed orders. And I got back to New York and I said, "What are we going to do?" And she said, "I don't know." And we were right there with the beatniks. We had read On the Road, both of us, so we got on the road. We started traveling across the country. And one of the coffee shops Ellen saw in the New York Times, the United Farm Workers were striking out in Salinas. We went right there. We had equipment, film equipment. Caesar loved cameras. He carried around a Nikon on his shoulders. And we filmed. And at the end, the last film, we had tiny little Dolores Huerta standing on an iceberg lettuce saying, "This is the end of the strike. We are now going to boycott lettuce." And that was the start of it. We showed the film in the Union Hall that night. Everybody loved it. And then later on at night, somebody shot through the window of the Union Hall. They were trying to intimidate us. Ellen the next morning got up and said, "I'm going back to New York. We need an attorney for this film company." And I started traveling with Cesar Chavez around the Southwest. About 10 days later, I got a call, and Ellen said, "I found a law firm that really works with activists." And I said, "Who?" And he said, Lubell, Fine, and Schaap. And that's kind of the end of my story, because once they started working, I'm telling you, it proved to me that the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. What they did with Sheridan Square Press, with Covert Action Quarterly, what they did was really miraculous. And Bill, both of you guys were really brave. I loved it. One thing I do know is that Loot, I followed all the way through. Ellen became so pissed off with the New York Times that she and Bill started publishing Loot, L-O-O-T, The Lies of Our Times. And I loved it. And that was pretty much it. But look around here today. I mean, look at everybody in this audience. We have some power here. We can get something. And Ellen loved big ideas. I mean, the world's history is full of big ideas. The world is flat, the world is round, the Magna Carta, these are all big ideas. But during our lifetime, there's been some huge ideas. The atom bomb, the anti-war movement. The Black Panthers were a big party. That's why the government felt compelled to kill about 20 of their leaders at least. Tiananmen Square is a big idea. Idle no more is a big idea. Wall Street, big idea. Occupy it. And the Arab Spring is a huge idea. All these are big ideas. Idle no more is a big idea. And so is Black Lives Matter is a big idea. And I want to set up a website in commemoration of Ellen. What's the big idea? And be a clearinghouse for next big ideas. And that's kind of it, except one thing. I got to say this, and then I'm through, Rosie. We were almost brainwashed in the Midwest. We only had 3 networks. We had nothing. These were all telling the same corporate stories, and we had the gut instinct. But the radio, there was one voice that came through that I remember, and it was Lord Buckley. And Lord Buckley used to talk about the Naz, and the Naz would walk around Jerusalem talking about love everybody. But John the Baptist said, no, baby, only Christians. JC said, no, I want to love everybody. I'm to love God. John the Baptist said, no, baby. And JC said, Jews, Christians, everybody, Muslims, I want to love everybody. John the Baptist grabbed him by the shoulder. He was on steroids, pushed him underwater. JC came up and said, okay, Christians. And that, folks, was the very first waterboarding that's ever recorded. Michael Ratner would have been the attorney, and Ellen would have covered it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's a good thing no one in this room writes for the Times, because that could be very, very awkward. Maybe a little, I don't know. But I could say if someone did, they never called a cop to ask for a cocktail recipe. So I think it's okay. I'm really incredibly delighted to introduce our final speaker this afternoon, another member of Bill and Ellen's beloved New Orleans family, Mary Howell.
Ellen would love this. She would just love it. And hearing these stories, I just feel like I'm hearing stuff about Ellen and relishing these stories, and it makes her feel very, very present to me. I'm part of Ellen's New Orleans family. And we were really lucky to have Ellen and Bill with us for the last couple of decades. I can't say that I know them in the way that you all have known them for all these years. I tell you, I never had a fight about East Germany with Ellen Ray. We had a different kind of relationship, a different kind of, I think that New Orleans was kind of a place that Bill and Ellen came for the food, for the culture, for the music, for the people, and it was a place that gave them nourishment, gave them spirit, gave them strength, and they gave it back to us in turn. I was listening to the stories about JFK, and you know, I'm a civil rights lawyer in New Orleans. I know Jim Garrison, and there was a minute when he was a circuit court judge in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and he called me up one day and he said, you know, I've written this book, and he said, and I've been rejected by 19 publishers. He said, I can't find a single publisher anywhere that's going to publish this book. Do you know anybody? And I said, well, let me look at it. Let me see, because I wasn't sure exactly. I knew he'd written a novel, he'd done different versions of the Kennedy assassination story. So he brings it over, and I sit and I read it, and I'm not an editor or writer, but I could see that there was some really powerful and interesting stuff there. And so I looked at the book, and I called him up and said, you know, there's only 2 people on this planet who are going to publish this book. And the name is Ellen Ray and Bill Schaap. And there's a guy who they knew named Zach Sklar who came in and made it real and shaped it and worked it into what it is, and the rest of it really is history. And I want to tell y'all, if you haven't noticed it, if you go and look at the director's cut of JFK, there's a scene in the Sazerac bar, and Ellen is a lounge lizard, and she didn't make the first cut, but she made this one. We were all extras in it. Bill's in it too, but I think he got cut. And there's this really elegant Ellen Ray, her hair's in a French roll, and she's all dressed up, and she's sipping a Sazerac at the bar. But you only catch her for a minute because there's a big fight going on between John Candy and Kevin Costner over whether or not John Candy's going to blurt out the truth about the assassination, and it all blows up. But if you get the chance to look at it, find it, because that's the kind of spirit that Ellen would bring to us. She rounded us all up, got us all in costumes, got us all down there, and she's the only one who made the cut. All the rest of us got X'd. The Ellen that we knew, though, in New Orleans is the same Ellen you all knew in really important ways. She was funny, she was smart, she was generous, she was loving, she was bold, she was tenacious. She was a great and true friend. I mean, if Ellen Ray was your friend, you were a lucky person, because she would always be there for you. It didn't mean she's always going to agree with you. Didn't mean she's not going to sit down and wrestle you down on some point or the other, but she's going to be there. And she, as people have said previously, was a person of definite opinions. And you didn't always have to agree with them, though. And Ellen did pick her battles. I was really interested hearing the stuff about the family meetings, because I always had a sense with Ellen that she actually did know when to pick a fight and when to pick the battle and who she could have these discussions with and not. There's people all over New Orleans who come up to me all the time, and they'll say, boy, we love your friends from New York. Says, they are so interesting. And I'm going like, whoa, if you knew the half of it. And a lot of people there didn't know them as political people. What they knew them was as loving, generous, supportive friends who loved the music, loved the jazz. Evan, they made so many new friends in the city that are really bonded to them in really profound ways. And I'll tell you something else that they did that was a big deal. This is a big deal to us. I think I'm going to choke up a little bit. Bill, help me. You know, this is coming on the 10th anniversary of Katrina. And we were down, and we were almost out. We came really close to being out. And there's a handful of people in this country and in this world who really just showed up and said, what can we do? And we want to put it on the line. And this may sound like a small thing, what I'm getting ready to say, but I'm telling you, to us, it was a big deal. Bill and Ellen, they've been coming down for years, visiting, staying with us, doing a lot of the adventures and stuff with us. Bill and Ellen, these are not wealthy people. Bill and Ellen said, we're moving to New Orleans. We're going to buy a condo in New Orleans. This is when people were fleeing. People were like, no one knew if the city was going to be back. They didn't know if we're going to have like running water. They don't know if we're going to have electricity. We don't know what they're doing with the levees. It was a very, very dicey period. And I can't tell you, you all coming there and making that commitment, making that investment, it lifted us all up, Bill. It let us know that we had friends and that there were people like you and Ellen who would always be there with us. And they weren't just there as observers, they became participants. There's a big Mardi Gras parade called Barkus. And if any of y'all know bamboo, I say people in New Orleans knew Bill and Ellen. People really know Barkus. I mean, they really knew, and they knew bamboo. And this is actually, it's a parade of pets and animals with human escorts. And there was a sort of 1 year, Bill and Ellen were participated in the Barkus parade with bamboo. And bamboo was dressed up as a New Orleans streetcar. You remember this? They're sort of famous in New Orleans. I know y'all have the picture of them at Occupy. You know, we have the picture of them at Barkus. And they're at Barkus, and they've got bamboo dressed up like a streetcar, and Bill is the conductor. And I tell you, that parade, they hardly got through the parade route because people kept stopping them to take pictures of them. And all over town, you would run into people who know that dog and know the two of them. The other thing that they did is they helped. We had one of the real problems. People couldn't get money to rebuild because you couldn't get clear title. But one of the great things about New Orleans, we're the second, the term that they used was they were the second largest nativist population in the United States. We had second largest, I think the first in the United States was a coal mining community in Pennsylvania. More people lived in New Orleans that were born there than almost any other city in the United States. And what that meant is that people had inherited property from their grandmother, their grandfather, their great-grandfather. Nobody ever got an estate open. Nobody ever had a succession. Nobody ever had title. If you didn't have title, you were lost after Katrina. You couldn't get money to rebuild. You couldn't get help to rebuild. Every door was closed to you. Bill and Ellen came down and volunteered. They don't know Louisiana law. You know, they came down and volunteered, figured it out. Bill figured it out. Ellen pushed Bill to figure it out. And they came in and helped people figure out how to save their homes and how to keep those homes in the neighborhood. Again, these may sound like small things, but when you're down and you're out, this is the stuff that really counts, and they were there. And I heard everybody talking about Bill and Ellen and being married for 44 years, and I also have that same question. How the hell did you do that? I mean, because part of those years are the 70s and 80s. Those are like dicey years. These are not easy years for people to still be standing at the end of it. But this is one of the great romances, I have to say, of our time. And you look at them and the love and the support and the vitality in their relationship has just been an inspiration to everybody who's been able to be around them and to see it. And I know that Bill says that his part of it was yes, dear. Well, Ellen would tell anyone who would listen that actually she had rescued Bill because he was in danger of living the rest of his life with a millionairess. Remember this one, the millionairess. And that but for her, that Bill would have lived this completely boring and uninteresting life. And thanks to her that she had rescued him and they got to live the life that they had together. I was once with them at sundown and went up to visit them. Do y'all remember that syndicated radio show that they were doing for a minute there? It's a syndicated live radio show, and it was Bill and Ellen reading the New York Times and commenting on the New York Times. And I was there visiting with them, and they were getting ready to do their broadcast. And I wish I had a film of this, because it's like 5 minutes to airtime, and they're looking all over. Bill, where's the paper? I don't know, Ellen, what did you do with it? You had it, where'd you put it? They can't find the paper that they're supposed to be commenting on for their radio show. And I'm sitting there, and I don't know if it's like George Burns and Gracie Allen or Mike Nichols and Elaine May, but I'm realizing I'm watching something really unique and unusual here. And so they finally get the paper. They're all tuning in. They're on separate phones, sitting in different rooms. I was kind of sitting between them. And Bill kind of picks up the New York Times. He's kind of coughing. He's very professorial, very sort of BBC-ish. And, you know, he's expounding on some, terrible error in the New York Times story and covering world events. And he gets about 30 seconds into what he has to say. And Ellen cuts in, Bill, that's not what it says. And then they're off. And I think about it now, and I hope someplace there are recordings of this show, because I tried to imagine what it would be like to be driving down the road and to hear this. And the only thing I can compare it to people who haven't seen that, it's sort of like a left-wing version of Click and Clack, in terms of the energy and the conversations that were going there. This last year, though, of Ellen's life has been pretty rough, as you all know. And Ellen, of course, knew she was dying. And she was worried about Bill, and she was often in pain. And that's when you all up here really rallied. And Karen and Michael and Debbie and Mike Smith and all the different people here in this room who did all the big things and the little things that helped them both. Ellen would tell me about them. I would call on the phone and ask her how she was doing. And every time I'd ask her how she's doing, she was fine. Ellen would say, I'm fine. And I knew she wasn't fine. She wasn't fine. But she was very present, and she was fully engaged, and she was fully aware of what was happening to her. And I will tell you, if any of us can learn from that, to approach this time in our life with the dignity, the strength, and the humor that Ellen found to get her through that, then we will really be blessed. And I will tell you, Ellen was not afraid of dying. She really was not afraid of dying. And I think as long as I've known Ellen, she's talked about dying. And she always told me she had a plan. And there were two parts to her plan. Number one, she intended to die in debt. Ellen was going to live her life fully. and richly, and she was not going to worry about that at all. And the second thing is that she was going to die before Bill, and she was very insistent about that point. And Bill has told me later that I haven't read this, I confess, but he said from Don DeLillo that there's a whole exchange, that they have talked about this for years, about who gets to go first, who's on first, who has to go first. And Ellen always insisted, I want to go first. And a good friend of ours from New Orleans, Lori DeFils, came up here to spend some time with Ellen and Bill in June, before they went upstate. And I asked Lori, I said, well, how are they doing? How's Ellen doing? She said, well, Bill had been in the hospital, he had pneumonia, he was really sick. And I said, well, oh boy, that sounds kind of dicey. How's Ellen doing? She said, well, Ellen's really mad. I said, well, what's she mad about? Well, she thinks that Bill's trying to die before her. And Lori comes back and tells me that, and I asked Bill if I could tell this story. He said, absolutely could tell it. And Lori's saying that she's sitting there watching this conversation where Ellen is talking to Bill, and she says, Bill, she says, you do not get to die first. I get to die first. Says, I have two things, and you only have one. So I get to go first. And it was just unthinkable to Ellen that wouldn't happen. And I have to say to Bill, to your everlasting credit, and I know this is a really, really sad and difficult time for you, but once again, you were able to help Ellen get what she wanted, and to help her through something that was really important to her and meant a lot to her. And that is a huge, huge thing. And when I think of Ellen, though, I try not to think about her death, but I want to think about how she lived her life. And I'm placed part-time in an old-time country music band and bluegrass band in New Orleans. And there's an old Carter family song. And the words in that song are there to tell a story. And the story that they tell us is to warn us. It's a warning in this song not to wait until people die to say nice things about them. And the refrain in the song is, give me the roses while I live. And I don't know if Ellen knew that song or not, but I would tell you, I always feel like Ellen Ray lived that song. Ellen Ray gave the roses while she lived. And she got them back. She got them back from those of us who loved her, who cared for her, who were blessed to be able to have her in our lives. And so when we think of Ellen, I think we should leave here today thinking, and I know we will for a long time, we should think of Ellen with a smile and a story. Because there are many wonderful stories about Ellen, and she was an absolutely amazing woman. She was a true original. She was an original. She was a unique individual. She lived her life to the fullest. She brought humor, grace, and a generous and loving spirit to all of us, and we were lucky to know her and to have her in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And now I'd like to introduce Brianna Thomas, who will sing Ellen's favorite song, and it's one I'm sure everyone in this room knows. Brianna, welcome.
Understanding that this was her favorite song, so it's a blessing to be here. God bless you all. I was born by the river in a little tent, oh, and just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's out there beyond the sky. It's been a long, long, long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. And I go to the movies, and I go downtown, but somebody tells me, man, don't you hang around. It's been a long, 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 long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Then I go to my brother, and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me right back down to my knees. There have been times that I thought I couldn't last for too long, but now I know that I'm able to carry on. It's been a long, 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 long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. I know a change is gonna God bless y'all.
On behalf of my uncle, Bill Schaap, and our family, and so many loved ones, I just want you to know how grateful we are for your presence here today to remember Ellen and to celebrate her. My wish for all of us is that at least a portion of Ellen's determination, joy of living, humor, grace, and love endures in our hearts and gives us comfort. Please join us in the parish hall right over there for a reception where I'm sure there will be many more stories of Ellen. And thank you so much.
I just wanted to say what a great event it was, and I think Ellen was really present. I keep kind of with all of the stories about her. She loved New Orleans so much. We would always go down to New Orleans, and Ellen and Bill showed us everywhere and all their friends. So I felt very much with the heat in August. It was very appropriate to have the heat with the New Orleans music, and it's been a great time. There are a lot of stories of Ellen. So the story that I wanted to tell, well, I wanted to talk about her telling stories and her being a journalist. And people were, I think, made the point here that Ellen, above everything, was a fantastic investigative reporter. She was also a media critic. Those kinds of things don't often go together in the same bundle, but they were in Ellen, and she was multifaceted and multi-talented. the thing about, I found immediately when I called up Project Censor, I said to my friend Peter Phillips, I know Ellen got a lot of awards. How many stories did she break for Project Censor? And how many times was she awarded? And it was 4 or 5 times. So in addition to the films and in addition to everything else, some very important stories she broke, and Project Censored, of course, is the organization that tells us about the stories that the mainstream press wouldn't publish, and Ellen did those kind of things too.
I want to say that Ellen was one of the most courageous people that I ever met, and she lived her life with, with passion and with conviction, and always was unafraid to go for it. And that was the most beautiful thing about her. And she took people with her. I was one of them, and I was very lucky to be one of them. And the other great thing about Ellen was it was always fun. Whatever you did, it was an adventure, and it was fun. She had just a passion for life and a joy in life, and all the politics and all that stuff was there, but it was always fun too. And that I never had so much fun as when I worked with Bill and Ellen down in that little office on West 4th Street, and they were doing Loop, and they were doing Sheridan Square, and they were doing Covert Action, and people were coming in and out. It was just fun. It was great. So Ellen, I always loved Ellen, and I will miss her very, very much.
Yeah, just to second that, she had a real joie de vivre, as they say in Haiti, and her contributions, I think, were laid out with beauty today. Her contributions to the struggle, to humanity in every domain, and we'll miss her.
What do you remember about Ellen? Or what should the world remember about Ellen?
Well, Ellen was a woman of not only great charm, but a moral force. I knew her before, but the first time I really got to know her, we went to South Africa together. Not South Africa, we went to Angola. And while we were there, South Africa invaded Angola, sent a military division up a desert highway. And Cuba had extended range artillery, far about 17 miles, and they tore that into what we call a division, about 20,000. They tore it up, and the guys were left out there in the desert and became prisoners almost immediately. And we were meeting with the soldiers, and the thing that was being done was discussion about whether they wanted to go home or whether they wanted to go someplace else. And amazingly, about a third of them decided to go someplace else. Didn't want to go home. They left South Africa as young conquering heroes. Maybe it was embarrassment, but I think some of them just said, no more apartheid for me.
And you were as a delegation with her? That was a delegation with Ellen?
We had a big delegation in the capital, but it was really the first year of the new administration of the first free government. And, but there were just, I think there were a dozen of us that flew down.
No, there was Nita.
We flew down, that's a big country, it's bigger than Texas. We flew down an hour flight, and we got in a truck. We had one truck, and we were about 10 or 12 of us standing up in the back of the truck, drove down where these guys were prisoners, more or less. You couldn't escape. You couldn't survive in the countryside.
Ellen Ray is somebody I hold dear in my heart. Ellen and Bill taught me more about the world we live in, about the need for change, fundamental change in this society, in this world. They took me to places that I never would have gone before. They educated me about Cuba. We went to Angola together. We shared in so many ways in producing a magazine for 27 years, Covert Action Quarterly. But I guess the special part for me is Ellen's straight-up courage. her vision. She always went straight to the nub of every issue, and she was unafraid to criticize you if it was in order. But I'll always love her very much. Thank you.